Welcome to another episode of the AI-driven Swebbcast. The source content is all Swebb, but the interpretation and presentation is all AI.
Okay, so you guys have sent in some notes from Swebb this time.
Yeah.
This is a church trainer and leader developer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is going to be a really interesting deep dive, because what we want to do is we want to try to extract the principles out of this without focusing too much on the specifics of like how much money was made or how many people were saved or whatever.
Right.
We want to kind of get to the core of what he's talking about and see if we can find some universally applicable principles about ministry growth and health that are scalable.
Right.
So they're not just about one person's success story.
Right.
And also, a lot of the work that Swebb does is with churches that are multi-site or are exploring multi-site.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be talking about some of those principles, but we want to make sure that it's clear that these principles are applicable
Right.
whether or not you're involved in a multi-site church.
Right.
So, yeah. So what are we really looking for here?
Yeah, I think the core question from all these notes from Swebb is, what are the things that really fuel like significant growth
Yeah.
and long-term health
Yeah.
in a church
Yeah.
or ministry?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I just want to know, like, how do we grow?
Yeah.
How do we stay healthy? How do we not, just
Right.
fizzle out after a little while?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And diving into Swebb's insights, like one of the things that jumps out right away is this idea of strategic investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how he frames this.
Okay.
It's not necessarily about the sheer volume of resources that you throw at something,
Right.
but it's the focused nature of even a smaller amount of resources
Okay.
that can yield like really outsized returns.
Gotcha.
Not only financially, but also in terms of impact and the overall health of the ministry.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, because he uses this figure, and I'm not going to say the exact number,
Yeah.
but it's like a relatively small amount
Right.
of money to illustrate this point that it's not about the size of the investment, it's about
Right.
the intentionality of the
The
investment.
intentionality, yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
Because he contrasts sort of like two paths that you could go down
Okay.
when launching some sort of ministry endeavor.
Okay,
One path is you do it sort of like in a mediocre way.
right.
Like you just kind of like get some general advice and
Yeah.
go about it and maybe you see some results over time.
Right, you get some salvations.
Yeah, you get some salvations, you get some, financial giving.
Yeah,
But then he contrasts that with like, okay, what if you approach this with real intentionality?
okay.
What if you take your core strengths
Mm-hmm.
and you maximize those through focus and simplicity?
Okay.
And then he suggests that what you're going to see is actually a much bigger impact.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact's not just going to be like a one-time thing. It's going to be something that's sustained
Okay.
and actually grows over time.
Yeah.
So the principle that he's getting at is that like
Yeah.
the real key to impact is not necessarily doing more thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing the things that you're already good at in a really excellent way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking of like this analogy of, those restaurants that have like one thing on the menu,
Right.
right? Like you go there and it's just like, okay, we make hamburgers.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yep.
And they're known for their hamburgers and they're amazing.
Exactly.
And, they're not trying to be everything to everyone.
Right.
They're just really, really good at that one thing.
They found their lane and they're crushing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what Swebb is getting at here is like, find your lane,
Mm-hmm.
figure out what you're really good at.
Yep.
And then do that really well.
Yeah. And to illustrate that further, he tells this cautionary tale
Okay.
about a church that attempted to launch a new location.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they went about it in kind of this haphazard way. They were relying on like conference anecdotes
Right.
and discount advice.
Yeah.
And they started with this really promising initial group.
Mm-hmm.
But then the momentum just like fizzled out
Yeah.
and it never gained traction.
Yeah.
And ultimately it became this huge drain on their finances.
Right.
Not just the initial investment,
Yeah.
but like the ongoing losses that they were experiencing.
It was probably a distraction too.
Totally a distraction,
Yeah.
like pulling their attention away from what they were actually good at.
Right. They're trying to do this new thing and it's not working. And so they're just like, pouring more and more money into it.
Yeah.
And it's just like a black hole.
It's a black hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that it wasn't just the financial hit.
Okay.
He actually highlights the reputational damage
Right.
that this caused
As a community.
in the community.
Yeah.
It left this negative impression.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this church, tried to do this thing.
Right.
And it failed.
And they couldn't even
Yeah.
get their act together enough to launch a new campus.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it really underscores this principle that like,
Don't just do stuff without thinking.
don't do stuff without thinking.
About it.
Yeah, have a plan, be strategic.
Right.
Yeah. It's like trying to bake a cake
Uh-huh.
with like a vague recipe you found online.
Yeah.
And like the cheapest ingredients you could find.
And mismatched measuring cups.
Yes.
Yeah.
And mismatched measuring cups.
Yeah.
Like the chances of you actually producing something edible are pretty low.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to waste those resources.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've talked about like the negative side of this.
Mm-hmm.
What about like a positive example?
Yeah. So Swebb transitions to this really compelling example of a ministry
Okay.
that over a 5-year period saw a huge increase in its tithes and offerings through its various expressions.
Yeah.
We're talking significant growth here.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is that the key factor that he points to was this relatively small initial investment in coaching and consulting.
Okay.
So they brought in some experts to help them think strategically.
Yeah.
And that's what really sparked this growth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they just came up with a brilliant idea on their own.
Right.
They brought in somebody to help them.
They brought in somebody to help them. Yeah.
To kind of think through.
To provide guidance.
Yeah, to provide that guidance.
Yeah. And what's powerful about this is that it really highlights this idea of the multiplier effect.
Okay.
He emphasizes that this investment wasn't just a one-time expense. It actually laid the groundwork for strategies that allowed these ministries to become self-sustaining.
Right. So it wasn't just like, give us the secret sauce and then we'll go off.
It wasn't a quick fix.
Right. Yeah.
It was like they invested in learning how to fish.
Right.
Instead of just getting a fish.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like teaching them how to think.
Exactly.
Strategically.
Yes. And perhaps even more telling is that years after the formal coaching ended, the positive trajectory continued.
Wow.
Both in terms of impact and financial stability.
So it wasn't just like a temporary boost.
It wasn't a sugar high.
Yeah. It was a lasting change.
It was a lasting change.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of this analogy of like, if you plant a seed, you have to water it and you have to fertilize it, but eventually it grows into this big tree.
Right.
And it can produce fruit for years and years to come.
And even more trees.
Exactly.
Right.
It can spread its seeds and create even more trees.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what this coaching and consulting is like.
Absolutely.
It's like planting a seed that can then grow and multiply.
And it can bear fruit for years to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And what I love about Swebb is that he's very clear. This is not based on like vague promises or wishful thinking.
Yeah.
This is like, he says it's math, not hype.
Right.
It's about the demonstrable results
that
come from implementing sound proven principles.
Yeah.
He's not trying to sell you on some magic formula.
Right.
He's saying like, look, this is how things actually work.
Yeah.
If you do these things, you're going to see these results.
Yeah. It's not about hoping for growth.
Right.
It's about creating the conditions for growth.
Creating the conditions. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
So we've been talking about this a lot in the context of multi-site churches.
Yeah, because that's a lot of what Swebb does.
Right.
He works with multi-site churches. But he makes this point that these principles are not just for multi-site churches.
Right. This is not just a multi-site conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, we're not a multi-site church.
Yeah.
This doesn't apply to us.
Right.
That's not what he's saying.
That's not what he's saying at all.
Yeah.
He's really talking about scalability, which is the capacity for growth in whatever form that takes for you.
Right.
And sustainability,
Yeah.
which is the ability to maintain health and effectiveness over time.
Right. So whether you're a church plant
Yeah.
or a megachurch,
Or a mega church.
these principles apply.
These principles apply
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's about being strategic and it's about making investments
Right.
that are going to yield long-term results.
Yeah. And he talks about all sorts of areas where these principles can be applied, like staffing, overcoming growth limitations.
Yeah, like how do you break through those ceilings?
Yeah, the ceilings.
Yeah.
Financial margin, like how do you create margin in your budget
Right.
so that you can actually invest in things? Team dynamics, like how do you create a healthy team culture?
Right.
So it's really about taking these foundational ideas
Yeah.
and then applying them across the board to all different areas of your ministry.
And I think what's really insightful is he talks about how these principles can move what might seem like an anomaly to normal.
Okay.
Like, sometimes you see a church that has this like crazy growth spurt.
Right.
And you're like, that's amazing.
Right.
But it's like a one-time thing.
Right.
But what if that wasn't a one-time thing?
Yeah.
What if that was just how you operated?
That was like normal.
What if that was normal?
Yeah.
And I think that's what these principles can do.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of strategic timing. Because he introduces this analogy of launch windows.
Launch windows, NASA.
Like NASA, yeah. Right? Yeah. Like when they're launching a rocket into space, they have to wait for the right moment. Right?
There's a specific time.
There's a specific window.
Yep.
And if they miss that window, they have to wait for the next one.
Exactly.
And he's saying that ministry is kind of like that.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because it's so true.
Yeah.
It's not just about having a great vision. It's about discerning the right time to launch that vision.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like reading the room.
It's reading the room. Yeah.
Right.
It's understanding like, okay, is this the right season for this?
Yeah. Do we have the resources? Do we have the people?
Do we have the momentum?
Momentum.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he also cautions against the assumption that just because you have a large existing congregation,
right,
that any new venture that you launch is going to be successful.
Automatically successful.
Automatically successful. Yes.
Yeah, just because you're big doesn't mean that everything you touch turns to gold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's advocating for this more thoughtful and discerning approach.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of being strategic, smart, and committed to continuous improvement.
So it's not just like, we're going to do this thing and hope it works.
Hope it works.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to do this thing. We're going to track our progress.
Yeah.
We're going to make adjustments along the way.
We're going to learn from our mistakes.
We're going to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's where the idea of proving a concept with a smaller investment comes in.
Right.
Before you commit significant resources.
Yeah, it's like running a beta test.
The running a beta test, yeah.
For a new software.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. You don't just launch the software to the whole world.
Right.
You release it to a small group of people.
Get feedback.
Get feedback.
Work out the kinks.
Work out the kinks.
And then release it to the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really wise approach for ministry as well.
Yeah. Don't go all in on something.
Yeah.
until you've tested it out.
Tested it out
On a smaller scale.
on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this leads into this idea that multi-site might not be the right path for every church. Right.
He underscores the importance of discerning, what he calls your tactical calling.
Your tactical calling.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about following the trends.
Right.
It's about really understanding, like, okay, what is God calling us to do
Yeah.
specifically in our context?
In our context.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. So as we kind of pull all this together, I think it really boils down to this proactive approach to ministry, where you're intentionally building the kind of ministry that you want to lead
Yeah.
and the legacy that you want to leave.
It's about being intentional.
It's about being intentional.
Yeah.
It's not just about letting things happen.
Right.
It's about making things happen.
Yeah. Taking ownership
Taking ownership. Yeah.
of your ministry.
Yeah. And I love this phrase that he uses,
Okay.
loosening the grip.
Loosening the grip.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think what he means by that is that sometimes as leaders, we need to step back from a purely operational mindset.
Okay. And be willing to seek wise counsel
Yeah.
and make strategic investments.
Even if it's uncomfortable.
Even if it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Even if it requires us to let go of some control.
Right. Or admit that we don't know everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think there are a few key takeaways that we want to leave you with.
Okay.
First, the power of focused investment,
Yes.
even in modest amounts when applied with strategic intent.
Yeah.
Second, the multiplier effect that can result from seeking experienced guidance through coaching and consulting. Third, the understanding that these principles of scalability and sustainability are universally applicable
Yes.
across various ministry contexts.
And not just for multi-site churches.
It's not just for multi-site churches.
Yeah.
And then finally, the crucial role of strategic timing and thorough assessment when launching new initiatives or making significant changes.
Yeah.
So I guess the question that we want to leave you with is, as you reflect on all of this,
Yeah.
what is one area in your current ministry where a more focused investment or seeking strategic guidance could potentially unlock significant growth
Yeah.
and contribute to greater long-term health?
Yeah. So take some time to think about that.
Yeah.
Pray about it and see what God might be leading you to do.
Yeah, I think that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to talk about these principles, but it's another thing to actually apply them
Yeah.
in your own context.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to take these ideas and let them resonate with your own experiences,
Yeah.
the challenges that you're facing, and the vision that you have for the future of your church.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think what Swebb is offering here is a really practical and encouraging framework for ministry.
Yeah, he's not just giving you theory.
Right.
He's giving you like actionable steps
Yeah.
that you can take. It's about moving forward with intention.
Yeah. Building strategically and establishing a strong foundation for lasting impact.
And I think that's a really hopeful message.
Yeah.
Because it means that we're not just victims of circumstance.
Right.
We could actually shape our future
Yeah.
by making wise choices.
That's good. Well, thanks for taking the time to unpack all this with me.
Yeah, this is great.
This was a good conversation.
Absolutely.
I hope this is helpful for everybody listening.
Me too.
Yeah. So until next time,
See ya.
keep digging.
Keep digging.
And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Are you going to do something with what you just heard? Or are you just trying to be entertained? Share this episode, then connect with Swebb. Bring him to your headquarters or visit him in Austin, Texas. Swebb is a productive disruptor for leaders and teams in churches and marketplace organizations. His goal is to make you better first, make you a friend later. Swebb serves leaders and executive teams around the world, primarily focused on helping organizations maximize what they say they want to do. He drives you to execute on your expectations, even if it hurts your ego. He's not here to please everyone, nor does he seek validation. But if you're serious about elevating your leadership and team performance, you'll know where to find him. Connect with Swebb at swebb.fyi or on Instagram at swebbfyi. You doing all you said you'd do, that's what the church and the world needs.